Well, the haters won't like it, but at least I'm feeling good enough after the man flu to get back to Boris Johnson after more than a week. And there was a lot going on during that week. It's not all good, but I can manage. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is confident that he will be re-elected. Apparently, he doesn't want to take responsibility for all of his mistakes. Boris Johnson has caused irritation with statements about his political future as British Prime Minister. When asked by a journalist if he wanted to run for a second term in the next election, the Conservative politician, during a visit to Rwanda last weekend, replied, "Right now I'm thinking about a third term and what could happen then. But I'll shake when the time comes." When asked, he was confident that he would definitely win the upcoming election for his second term, which is normally in 2024. He's actually considering a third term by the mid-2030s, he added. Johnson has been in office since 2019. However, such demonstrative enthusiasm can hardly hide the fact that the majority of voters have already lost confidence in Johnson. The latest evidence were Thursday's by-elections in which his Conservative party, the Tories, lost in two key constituencies: the working-class town of Wakefield in northern England and rural Tiverton and Honiton in the southwest. In Wakefield, Labour triumphed with just under 48% of the vote. Conservatives just got 30%. In Tiverton and Honiton, the Liberal Democrats won a historic victory with just under 53% of the votes and the Conservatives with 38.5%. Labour leader and opposition leader Keir Starmer was enthusiastic. "This is finally the change that we have been working for so long. We are again a party with confidence and a future," he said. Now it's becoming clear that Labour can win the next election. New Devon MP Richard Ford of the Liberals fumed, "At a time when Johnson could have helped farmers, supported the health system and our rural areas, his political survival was at stake. The voters have had enough. Johnson must go." Historically, by-elections as a lesson for the government are not uncommon. But the force with which the political upheaval in Britain was manifest this time surprised even the Conservative Party. The day after, co-chairman Oliver Dowden resigned, and the cabinet members' warning in a letter to Johnson was quite clear. Business as usual could no longer continue, and someone had to take the consequences. "Our voters are upset and disappointed," he wrote. 3 weeks ago, 41% of the parliamentary group members withdrew their support from the Prime Minister in a vote of no confidence. There is a growing fear in the party that Johnson will become a liability, although I say he already is, and that would be better for him to be replaced before the next election. Polls show that the public doesn't just reset Johnson's partying during lockdown. People are bitter that while Johnson pulled through on Brexit, he's not helping them enough in these times of hefty inflation, falling real wages, and persistently high immigration. British media such as the Daily Telegraph and polling institutes such as YouGov calculated at the weekend how many parliamentary seats Johnson could lose in the next general election if the voters then decide. The main thing is not the Tories. If that's the result, that would be devastating. In theory, only 26 Tory MPs would remain in office. The vast majority of the cabinet, including Johnson, would be out. But Johnson confidently smashes any criticism, as he did recently with his allusion to a third term. Recently, he even remarked that his political career had only just begun. His cabinet is still loyally behind him. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries recently told Sky News that Johnson must continue because the party's financial backers wanted it that way. The Sun newspaper published a letter in which 22 of the Prime Minister's top donors pledged their support. Most of them hope that Johnson will continue to turn away from the EU, more deregulation of the City of London, and neoliberal trade policy. So this party is now even confessing they're bought. In political London, however, there are increasing numbers of voices that would like to see the head of government move out of Downing Street, and that as quickly as possible. The 58-year-old survived, as I said, a recent no-confidence vote by his Conservative faction, but only with a lot of opposition, more than even May had. A few days ago, Johnson suffered electoral defeats in those two by-elections, prompting his General Secretary Oliver Dowden to resign. And that statement I cited before, that was quite blunt, I must say. And while his critics in the party dismissed Johnson's remarks about a third term as a bunker mentality and illusory, the Prime Minister told BBC Radio 4, "These are difficult times and voters always take their anger out on politicians. It does the trick, the job with it. Well, it comes with the job. He has to distinguish between criticism that really matters and criticism that doesn't. And people are fed up with the fact that people only talk about him and what he allegedly screwed up. There are more important things. We have massive work ahead of us here. We are reforming the government, the constitution, the legal system. We are changing how we deal with our borders, with our economy. At the same time, we want to raise the standard of living, bring the country together. That it all takes time, and I want to push that forward." Well, he's turning the country into not a democracy. But one thing definitely will not happen, that he will change his character under this pressure. He will not go through some psychological transformation. That will never happen. But that's exactly what the voters would obviously like. In North Wakefield, the poor working class town traditionally firmly in the hands of the Labour Party and only falling to the Conservative Party with Brexit in 2019. Well, a majority of Conservative voters stayed at home or voted back for Labour in the by-election. This has a signal effect because it shows that the switch from Brexit supporters from Labour to the Conservative Party may not last. And Johnson is already losing a new important part of his supporters. And meanwhile, in the traditionally Conservative constituency of Tiverton and Honiton, the Liberals came to power for the very first time. Again, the Conservatives stayed away from the election or made a fresh decision. This is also a concern for the Tories because it means that support in the traditional constituencies is crumbling. The parliamentary group is particularly concerned that the voters apparently voted tactically. That means they chose the opposition MP who had the best chance of winning. The opposition parties played along with that. In Wakefield, the Liberals held back in favour of Labour in the election campaign. In Tiverton and Honiton, Labour hardly featured in the election campaign. And Johnson? Well, he was elected in 2019 for his robust personality, which is now becoming a liability, and his politics are just as unconvincing, a difficult situation for the party. Traditionally, the Conservatives touted that they would ensure peace, order and prosperity economically and politically, while Labour threatened the country with strikes, exorbitant government spending, high levels of debt and short-sighted populist decisions, even that no longer works under Johnson. Especially not now when the country is experiencing a massive wave of strikes, which some are already comparing with the proverbial winter of discontent at the end of the 1970s. Only this time as a summer of discontent. Britain is suffering from rapid inflation, blatant debt, enormous government spending, and expects the lowest economic growth of the G7 countries next year. At the same time, the lack of staff in the authorities after the mass layoffs during Corona is unnerving. Young people have to wait months for their driving tests and families for new passports. Holiday connections have been cancelled for weeks due to a lack of staff at the airports. It's bad here too, but not that bad. So the chaos is already there, and other countries are currently struggling with similar difficulties, as I said, but Johnson is doing everything he can to make his mark with populist politics in order to stay in the headlines and in office. And every argument helps. With the EU about Northern Ireland policy, with the European Court of Justice about the new refugee policy, no, it was ECHR, not the ECJ, and with the World Trade Organization about punitive tariffs and steel imports. This also works because none of his potential competitors has a better program that convinces, which is especially true for the critics in his own party. They all squirm, whether it's about Brexit or refugee policy. Nobody dares to suggest alternatives. So Johnson's strength is actually his opponent's weakness. As long as it stays that way, he will probably fantasize about a third term far more often, and don't talk about fourth and fifth or whatever. According to The Telegraph, Johnson is preparing to introduce new steel import rules to protect domestic producers from the cheaper foreign steel. This is intended to secure votes, especially in the economically dependent areas of England, as the newspaper reported. However, the rule change could mean another breach of international law, a transgression that the British government is currently being accused of in other contexts several times. And about the ECHR, I just want to suggest that everyone has a look. If you don't know this video, you have to see it with Sir Patrick Stewart, my beloved Captain Picard, talking about the Convention on Human Rights. It's a great video. And I'm not at my best yet, but I'll see you in my next video, definitely. Bis gleich.